Hello, everybody. I'm just getting things set up. Excuse the silence for a moment. Hi.
My 10 students or so should be joining any minute.
Okay. I'm not going to let everyone in right away because otherwise it'll be mayhem. And I want to make sure that Brittany is set up.
Okay, so, that sounds fine, yeah. I mean, they're expecting 1:50, so it can be a little bit late. I think people are used to the waiting rooms at this point.
Okay.
Gives me a chance to eat my cookies. Do you need any help with anything, Emma?
I'm not hugely experienced with hosting these, so just I think patience would be appreciated. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for somebody who is going to co-host it with me to help me make sure everybody gets entered very soon, but I don't see them in the list yet, and I can't quite see.
Okay. I mean, the only advice I would have is maybe to have people ask questions in the chat format. You know, then they can ask questions as other things are going on, and then you can read them or the other host can read them.
Okay, that's
a larger group that sort of prevents the chaos, and then you can have open questions at another point, and have you know, people can raise their hand. There's a little hand raise function here.
Okay, a minute. Sorry. Oh, there she is. Okay. Oh, oh, moving around. Okay. In co-host. Yes. Brittany?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, yay! Hello!
Hey, how's it going?
Good to see you. Amazing. It's working, yay! Do you want to have a go and see if your slides will share?
Yeah, let me try that.
We'll
Right?
do a practice and I'll sort out the rest of the people coming in and things, and
Okay.
assign my co-host who's going to help
Perfect.
me getting people.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Paulina, welcome. Hi. I've made you co-host, and Brittany, you're now co-host too. So hopefully you can share slides. And Paulina is going to be assisting me with letting people into the meeting today. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bard College, and especially welcome, Brittany Kaiser. Very excited. We have a few minutes left, so we're just going to get ourselves organized for now. Just to let everybody know, so that you're all aware, we're recording this, and with Brittany Kaiser's permission, I think we're going to be putting this online at some later point, so that people can benefit who weren't able to make it today. I'm sure we all know who Brittany is, but I'll introduce her once it's time and everybody is in.
Emma, can you see my screen?
I can. Can everybody else see it okay? Great. Yep, good, good. Everyone can see. Wonderful. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Getting used to leading a completely digital life.
Oh, I know. It's insane. And I never thought I'd be teaching my module, Propaganda, Dark Arts in a Digital Age, purely through the forces of surveillance capitalism.
I know, honestly. It's so crazy.
Oh my God, what a world we're in. I mean,
yeah.
seriously.
That most people were not prepared for that. I never thought that the digital literacy training that I started doing would now be essential for every person.
Absolutely, absolutely. We never realized in 2018 just how prescient this was about to become, really. And I think that's something maybe we can explore a little bit in the questions afterwards.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
You still see me and the slides, or only the slides?
I can only see the slides, but
okay. I'm going to stop sharing that for now, so I
yeah.
can say hi to everyone first.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And I'm going to introduce you in a few minutes. We're still
Great.
not quite 2 o'clock.
Yeah, how's it going over there?
Oh, it's okay. I mean, just lonely, actually. I'm on campus. So literally it's just this like little glen in the forest with virtually no students here apart from me. But it means that I've got beautiful walks around me and it's just a lovely place to be. I mean, it really is just amazing here. So, and very safe, of course. So I'm probably in the safest place there could be in New York State at the moment.
Yeah, it's much better that you're not that you're not in the city, that's for sure.
It's crazy though, isn't it? I mean, I'm on my own here, so very strange just, you know, having nobody around and having to interact with everybody digitally. I guess there's a lot of people in that position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just moved into a group house, so now there's 4 of us. So I see 3 other human beings, which is
nice.
Makes me feel a lot less crazy.
yeah, totally.
The first few weeks was really intense because I really was completely by myself, and I don't think I've been by myself for a straight many weeks, like ever.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's really strange. I'm a very social person, and for me, it's just very odd to be isolated or on my own. I mean, I was sharing a house with somebody before, and now I'm suddenly in a big 4-bedroom house rattling around all on my own. It's very weird. But I guess it's probably the best thing that could possibly be at the moment.
Yeah.
And my family are about to kill each other with being in a house on their own together. So I suppose there's a blessing in it.
True. Learning how to be introspective, I suppose, is a good thing.
Yes, it is. And I'm learning how to paint.
Exactly. Cool. New skills. Everyone should come out of this with new skills.
I know. Everybody I know is baking bread, which seems like a strange thing for me. Something everybody's got culinary skills, but I don't think that's likely to happen to me. I'm still, you know, eating my takeout from ready meals and stuff. Freezer food. I'm going to turn the light on in here because I think it's a bit dark, and then maybe we'll get started.
Absolutely.
I don't understand how everyone is baking bread because there's like no yeast in stores like at all. So like I have no idea how they're baking it.
I guess they stocked up in advance when they were buying the toilet rolls, I guess.
I started growing my own food, not baking bread, but it's, you know, as close as I could get to it.
Oh my God, I'm amazing.
Lettuce and radishes and cucumbers and all of this stuff. It's amazing.
That's so cool. Well, I started, this is rather pitiful, but my mom said, like, put the carrots, the carrots in a mug with some water and they'll grow. So I have this. This is the whole like culmination of my gardening skills. I don't think it's going to work. I think the coronavirus will be over by the time I get a full carrot.
Well, you have time to experiment and find out.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh dear. We got, how many we got? We got 20 so far. That's great. Wonderful. There's a few more minutes still. So
so everyone's gone home that's here. Everybody is calling in from home.
Yeah, basically. I mean, there may be some folks who live around the campus who are zooming in. I was going to say Skype, zooming in. But mostly people are quite far flung at this point, I think. Apart from me, because I'm actually on campus. But yeah, I think we also haven't opened it up publicly. It's just at the moment people on campus or students who have gone home and things like that. So it's not going to be like a massive public audience, although we're getting requests to share the video publicly afterwards. So absolutely. I think a lot of people were a bit disappointed that we're not streaming it live. But I think it's
always happy to do whatever you guys want to do. The more content creation during this time, the better. Well, I'm used to being on a stage every day, so yeah, it saddens me that I can't be with you all in person on the Bard campus.
Oh, me
too. But I'm very happy that we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, and you told me how much you really, think a lot of Bard. So it was really nice to be able to invite you.
Yeah, I so enjoyed the trips that I took to Bard, and I got accepted to go there for college, and I decided to go abroad. But if I was going to stay in the US, I was going to go to Bard in the international. I was really excited about that, but I ended up moving to Scotland.
Yeah, well, Scotland is also amazing. But yeah, Bard welcomes you anyway, and I think we should probably just get started now. So I'm just going to introduce Brittany Kaiser, former business development manager director at Cambridge Analytica. And she's one of the whistleblowers who was a central figure from the film The Great Hack, and has now written a book about her experiences at Cambridge Analytica, and afterwards a story of redemption called Targeted. And she's moved on to become an activist in the world of data and what we should be doing with it now. So we'll talk about those issues after the lecture. This is a lecture that's part of the Human Rights Program course, Propaganda, Dark Arts in the Digital Age. Brittany Kaiser is going to talk for around 45 minutes, followed by a chance for you all to ask questions. If you want to, you can put some questions in the chat, but I'll open it up so that people can ask questions themselves afterwards as well. But my students have been doing lots of reading on Cambridge Analytica, so I'm hoping that they'll have a few questions up their sleeves already. I'll be excited about this lecture today. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. It's really amazing to have you here, Brittany. And I'll open the floor to you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here and so happy we were able to make this happen virtually. As I said, I wish that I could have been with you guys all together in person on Bard's campus, but no one in the world is getting that opportunity these days. So I'm happy to love your faces virtually, of course. So I do prefer for you guys to be able to see my face when I'm talking, and if you have a burning question, I'll try to keep an eye on the chat as well, but I'll try to share my screen for some slides and then pop back in if it's a part of my talk where I'm just going to get a little bit more into it, so you can see me. Balancing this in the virtual world is difficult because usually you get to see me in slides very easily at the same time. So yeah, I really thank you guys for having me here today. What you may know a little bit about me, you may know a lot about me, depending on how much you've been reading over the past few years about data rights, about the evolution of privacy and data protection regulation, about advances in technology like blockchain and distributed ledger in order to solve some of these problems, and ways in which data was abused in the 2016 election campaigns, and the problems that we have especially continued to have in relation to fake news, disinformation, voter suppression, and other abuses of data and social media platforms, which I think will be really important for us to talk about today. So I'm just going to share my screen for a second. Just let me know that you can see that. Yeah, all good?
Yep, I can see.
Oh, perfect. Okay, guys. So when you first started reading about me perhaps was when I came out as a whistleblower about 2 years ago. It was the end of March 2018 when the first stories hit the press about Cambridge Analytica, and I started something called the Own Your Data campaign in order to inform the world of what happened, not just in the 2016 election campaigns, but the way that the data industry, the way that the technology industries around the world have been developed in order to very easily manipulate and exploit people. And while I am an eternal optimist and a technologist where I really believe in what AI and data science can do for the future, I think it's very important that we take a more careful and prescriptive approach about how these tools are allowed to be accessed and by whom, for what purposes from here forward. So own your data really means that we should have more control, more rights over our virtual lives, over our digital selves that are really becoming exponentially more, exponentially larger every single day with the amount of data we're producing. As of 2017, it's estimated that data has become more valuable than oil. Data is now the world's most valuable asset, and most of the world's most valuable companies hold their value because in general, they are made up mostly of our digital assets, a value that has been taken from us in a very comprehensive surveillance kleptocracy kind of way. And I really do mean it when I say kleptocracy, because every tool that we use every single day is made to collect as much information about us as possible. And for those, therefore, those companies to learn as much about us and then be empowered to be able to sell to us, to communicate to us, and to influence our actions and behaviors. And really, when we talk about behaviors, I think that's where I got interested and came down in the place. In order for you to understand a little bit more about why I'm the person to talk to you about this, I got really interested in data, specifically in politics. I joined the Obama campaign in 2007, the first presidential campaign, after having volunteered for Howard Dean's primary campaign, then John Kerry for the DNC. And I had started to see how data and how digital platforms were being developed in order to drive people to behave in a certain way, to take certain actions. And all right, I'm just gonna come back on screen for a second so you can see me when I'm talking. Yeah. In 2007, I joined the first presidential campaign for Barack Obama. I went to headquarters in Chicago and joined what was called the New Media Team, which now would be separated into development and data science and digital content production and social media. But at the time, it was just new media, and there were just a handful of us. My first assignment was to create Barack Obama's Facebook page. And over the months that I was there at the campaign, we started to develop rudimentary tools to collect data on individuals, to find out what would drive them to want to register to vote for the first time, or what data we could collect that would tell us more about the policies of Senator Obama that should be communicated to folks so that they would get excited about politics, so that we could tangibly understand how to drive people to what we saw as taking positive actions, right? And I spent very many years after that studying to become a human rights lawyer. I have many human rights law degrees, so I'm very, very happy to be speaking to this class in particular, because I've seen the development and innovation in technology as something that could be used for positive social impact, where we could really harness technology in order to protect people's human rights and to really get people to engage in politics and in the world around them in a positive way. So I spent many years after the Obama campaign working for human rights NGOs like Amnesty International and doing consultations for UN departments. And a lot of the communications work that I was doing had to do with developing strategies to collect data and put together campaigns that would drive people to take actions. I mean, that's one of the core proponents of what a lot of human rights NGOs do in the first place. How do you understand how you can communicate to people to get them to help uphold human rights, or to get them to donate, or to get them to share, to raise awareness. And for a long time, I guess I was naive and blinded by how effective these tools were for causes that I believed in. But I definitely didn't see what was coming in the future for me. So I was writing my third. I was in the third year of writing my human rights law PhD, and I was writing on. I was specifically writing on preventive diplomacy. And when you talk about preventive diplomacy, like how ambassadors or heads of state or other people that hold good offices powers, how they can exert influence on people in order to prevent crimes against humanity, war crimes, and all types of violent crime. My research ended up being mostly about how you could use data in order to do predictive modeling and prevention strategies, right? How do you stop these things from happening instead of concentrating on punishing the fact? And you know, no one at my law school could teach me about advanced predictive algorithms. So I was introduced to the CEO of Strategic Communication Laboratories, the SCL group, Alexander Nix. That was the parent company of Cambridge Analytica. And when he described to me what they could do with data and what they were doing with data around the world, I got really excited about it. He told me that at the time they had this, well, actually it was the first contract I ever saw when I joined the company, this big contract with NATO, where they were training NATO allied militaries in order to use data online to predict who was vulnerable to being recruited into ISIS. They were concentrating on young people in the United Kingdom for this project at first, and helping to identify these vulnerable individuals and convincing them to stay at home, stay with their families, as opposed to sneaking themselves into Syria, which was a really big problem at the time. Now I thought, well, hey, this is exactly what I want to be doing with my life. This is a measurable, effective way to use data to communicate to people, where you can not only see your results, you can measure it on a very exact scale, how influential you are being. And for me, that was really exciting. As an activist that had come from a background where it's really difficult to tell all the time if your campaigns are being effective. How many people are you actually communicating to and reaching and influencing, and being able to measure all of that, see the numbers, and have a data-driven approach for these types of activities, to me was exactly what I wanted. So I joined the SCL group as a part-time advisor in the beginning, to start working on some projects there and write my PhD at the same time. So you know, over my years there, I worked in nearly every continent. I probably went to 30 different countries, and was one of the main business development directors. So I spent most of my time meeting with people who were heads of state or wanted to be, people who were running for different levels of positions, but usually it was national campaigns. A lot of interest groups, a lot of campaigning organizations, a lot of companies, and government officials as well that weren't running for a position, but were running communication programs on behalf of the government, or were trying to form policy based off of public data. And over those 3.5 years, nearly 4 that I was there, I helped design those programs for whoever these people were and what they were trying to achieve, whether it was to win an election or sell a new brand of car or to better understand how to develop new policies for a political party or for a government based off of data in the end. And I learned quite a lot, not only about data, which was what I was seeking to do, but about where data comes from and how it's collected, how it's held, how it's monetized, how the infrastructures to collect data have been developed, and how intentional it is when companies or governments have very tiny additions to get us to agree to give away as much as they can possibly convince us to give away, and what that actually means. You know, how all of this data is collected and modeled and used to run targeted communications, to run what are called behavior change campaigns by NGOs, by United Nations departments, and now by political parties as well, right? And all of those things that I learned of everything that I learned while designing these programs, what really stuck with me is how little transparency we have into what is being collected about us, how we literally have no choice over how that data is used, who's holding it, for what purposes and intentions are they employing it on a day-to-day basis, and that we have no rights to monetize any of these digital assets. We have no ownership or control over them. So I'm gonna hop back down into the slides over here. So yeah, there we go. Can you see my slides again? There we go. So around this time, 2 years ago, eventually I had seen enough. There had been enough red flags for me when already over the years that I was traveling with the SCL group, with Cambridge Analytica, to different countries, again, designing these programs for political parties and companies and powerful individuals and governments and militaries. You know, I eventually started to realize that the main issue in the entire kind of digital infrastructure was lack of rights, and that there was a huge opportunity to change that. Now, a couple months before I became a whistleblower, I was looking for other things that I could do outside of Cambridge, and I started working on digital asset legislation and policy. Again, I spent about 10 years in law school and did a lot of legal lobbying and advocacy work on while I was involved with all of those human rights NGOs and campaigns. And so that was what I decided to leave Cambridge to go do, to work on digital asset legislation, regulation, privacy. Now, while I was going through the process of figuring out what to do, all of a sudden, the entire, wait, right here we go. All of a sudden, there are massive stories all around the world about how the company I'm working for many years had a Facebook data set that they had not deleted in a database that was used to elect President Donald Trump. Now, while that wasn't surprising to me at all, it was shocking but not entirely surprising given the laissez-faire attitude that some of the data scientists and executives of Cambridge Analytica used to act. I very quickly realized that most of the world was so shocked by this story because they didn't actually understand how big the problem was. The size of the problem was much bigger than a Facebook data set. This was one small data set that was in a massive database about everybody in the United States with thousands of data points on hundreds of millions of individuals. Yet everyone seemed to be very upset about one Facebook data set. So I luckily had still access to all of my Cambridge Analytica files. I had left the company about 2 months before, but still had my work computer. And after these first stories started to hit the press, I went to San Francisco to meet Paul Lewis, who was the head of, he was the bureau chief of The Guardian in San Francisco. I said, okay, well, not only was there this Facebook data set, here is how big the problem actually is. Here's where all of this data is coming from. Here's how it's held and used. This is everything that was used in the Ted Cruz campaign and Donald Trump's campaign. Here's how the super PACs used it for the Defeat Crooked Hillary campaign. Here's how it's used in countries across Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, South America, and the sprawling size of hands seem to get exponentially bigger every single day. And the reason why that is the case is because we are actually producing exponentially more data every day. My former CEO used to say that data collection was an arms race, and whoever could accumulate the most amount of data would be the most powerful, the most influential, and therefore, as Emma titled this lecture, have the power to run data-driven propaganda campaigns. And it took me a while to come around to the fact that, you know, most micro-targeting campaigns really are just another form of propaganda, because people who are advertising to you, whether it be for political or commercial purposes, know enough about you that they are able to create communications made just for you and be able to influence you in exponential ways that were not possible before. And you know, it wasn't an easy decision to come out publicly and start releasing documents from my old company and go through the whole process of whistleblowing, because most people that go through this process usually have an issue that falls on deaf ears. You don't know if you're ever going to get a job again. You don't know if you're going to spend your whole life drowning in lawsuits. You don't know if you're going to be physically safe. But the size and the enormity of this issue seem to really just hit home for people. You know, Chris Wiley and I would say, were a bit luckier than most people that go through this process, where we got a massive wave of support from around the world of other people that had either already been working for nearly their whole lives, or this was the first time they had ever realized that this was a problem. But from you know, age-old privacy advocates to you know, the first a person hearing about this for the first time, what we were doing really hit home. And since March 2018, you know, what I think a lot of us have realized was that this Cambridge Analytica Facebook issue was the tip of the iceberg. You know, this was one small problem that was indicative of how basically how our entire world has become a surveillance state, where because we don't have rights to the data that we're producing, just like Alexander Nix said, whoever had spent enough money and time collecting data in this arms race was going to be the most powerful. And as we're producing exponentially, we're moving into a world of smart cities and development of IoT, new artificial intelligence solutions, robotics. We really need to figure out what we want our rights to be and start to enshrine that in laws and regulations that are enforceable. So I want to talk a little bit more about some of the different concepts in data rights and digital asset legislation, and how we are currently unprotected. So I called my campaign Own Your Data because I am a big proponent of laws and regulations that are enforceable. So I explore an area of law where data is owned. It's an asset class where you can own it like a property. Now, we've managed to pass laws in a few different states where you do own your data as an individual property. If you want to think about what this would look like in practicality, I'd like to talk about the Airbnb business model, which is that, for instance, if you were producing data about yourself that you were happy to share or give people access to, then if someone wanted to access your data as property, they would, like on Airbnb, they tell you who they are, how long they want to use your property for, what they're going to use it for. Then you agree on a price and you get paid before you hand away the keys. So I really think that the ownership of your data, just because it's intangible, that ownership rights and ascribing property rights is a very interesting way to look at this problem. Obviously, my background is human rights law, and I do believe that data rights should be fundamental and should be considered in our basic human rights, especially now that the entire world is leading a nearly fully digital life. But when we talk about enforcement, in most legislative frameworks, it's very easy to enforce property rights law. For instance, we were able to use the property rights framework to win the first successful case against Equifax for their data breach. We sued Equifax in the state of Minnesota for property damage, and we won at the Supreme Court. So your data is your property in case law in the state of Minnesota, because we first sued Equifax for the damage that they did to the property of over 150 million Americans. Now, some other concepts that are very important is transparency and opt-in. So what I advocate for is the regulation of tech companies and platforms so that they have to be transparent about what they are collecting from us. And not only to be explicit about what they are collecting from us, but give us the ability to opt in or out of each of the ways that data is being collected and who that data would be shared with, right? So this is where we get more into permission structures and traceability. A lot of the companies that I advise on their data protection protocols, on their privacy standards, we work a lot on what permission structures and traceability should look like. So what options are you giving to people about how their data is collected and how it can be used? How can we track and trace what this data is going to be used for, and give people the right to opt out, really. And if you would be able to have a permission structure where you can trace exactly where your data is going and what it's being employed for. So another part of this conversation is monetization rights. So if companies are monetizing your data, they are making money off of the use of your data, that you would receive a percentage of that value. One of the other concepts that we talk about is fractionalized ownership. So say, for instance, I'm producing data in Facebook. I admit that, yes, Facebook has spent a lot of money building the infrastructure to collect my data. So perhaps the data that I produce in Facebook, I would have partial ownership rights of, and the Facebook platform would have partial ownership rights. Therefore, I would get what is talked about as a data dividend. I'll go further into that, where I get a percentage of the value of the monetization, depending on how they're using it. And so, I think it's also very important when we're talking about practical implementation and enforcement, that I am not the biggest privacy advocate in the world. I believe that people should have the right to keep their data private. I believe that people should have the capabilities and the platforms to keep their data private if they so choose. But I do really believe in the future of AI and data science. And I do believe that technology innovation is usually an inherent good. And the reason why we need to put up laws and regulations is for our legislative framework to be moral and ethical guidelines that are enforceable. So if we're talking about enforceability, we have to recognize that we can't overregulate in a certain way, because we do need some AI and data science in order to progress as humans. And this is actually one of the biggest conversations that's going on in the world right now. I don't know if you guys have recognized that over the past few weeks, the New York Times editorial board, the Washington Post editorial board, US Congress have all put out their thoughts on big data and how it's being used to prevent the spread of coronavirus. I hosted an entire conference on this last Thursday, where I had experts from all around the world talking about what extra data is being collected now, what historical data sets, especially like location data, is being employed for contact tracing, and how that is either being done in a privacy-centric way, or if it's being done in a way that threatens data rights. It's definitely been used by different governments and regimes around the world, and it can easily be used as an excuse to delete whatever data rights we've been able to pass over the past few years, and take us back to square one, which is why I'm so vocal about this right now. Actually, over the next few days, I still think Congress is accepting written submissions on the coronavirus and big data. They started a paper hearing last week, which means that they call up a list of witnesses. But obviously, since we're not gathering in person, people are submitting online, and it's being posted on Congress's website, their testimonies. So I suggest you guys definitely check that out. But right now, one of I would say the most controversial discussions going on right now is, our data could save our lives if it could save human life. And I think that's where I really saw technology and human rights going hand in hand, where we would actually be able to save human life using data. I mean, I definitely think that the future is going to be AI and data science solving our biggest problems, making sure that we can cure diseases that we can't cure today, making sure that we never again have someone die in a traffic accident. These are the types of innovations that I think are very important, and why we need to protect technology innovation, but at the same time, make sure that we can protect people from the abuse of their data. So I want to go over quickly what are some of the current legal frameworks that are most important in this discussion today. GDPR came in CPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, come in on January 1st. Now, while GDPR allows individuals to opt in for consent, in the United States, we are still by default opted in. So CCPA allows us to opt out. That's one of the major differences between the US and Europe right now. We are pre-opted in just by being in the United States. So that's definitely something that is being debated. I think it's really important to point out that now for nearly 2 years, we have been able to file something called subject access requests in Europe. So you are allowed to demand access to all the data that's being held on you in Europe, the right to have it erased or corrected, and the right to get notified of data breaches. CCPA gives us some similar rights, able to enforce your right for a company or organization to disclose what they're holding on you, and if it's being sold or held, and who it's being provided to. Now, unfortunately, because of the way CCPA was written, there's already a massive update coming in, because Facebook said that they do not they do not sell user data, and therefore they do not have to comply with CCPA. So you'll be seeing a big update that is coming to CCPA over the next few months. I expect it to get through very soon. Now, the enforcement. This is something that I feel very passionately about, which is that both GDPR and CCPA have got this wrong, where it's just a fee. I think civil fines for data abuse, of voter suppression, manipulation campaigns, using data-driven slander and libel in political campaigns, incitement of racism or violence on social media that is also being done both by domestic and foreign actors on social media platforms. No, I don't think that a civil fine is the future of data crimes. I really do see it as a criminal activity that where we need more accountability. Invoices that get paid by companies who violate data rights are not a deterrent for them to cease the abuse of some of these rights. So I honestly advocate for much harsher punishments for companies that don't take these rights seriously. There's a lot of legislation that's coming in, and you know, we definitely have champions specifically in US Congress that are really pushing to get us as many new rights as possible. And as I was just talking about, you know, enforcement, one of my favorite acts that is waiting to be considered in Congress is called the Corporate Executive Accountability Act, introduced by Senator Elizabeth Warren. She introduced this in order to address problems like Equifax and Facebook, where you have a big corporation who's not taking consumer protection seriously and can and is displaying, you know, gross negligence, really, which is the same in both cases. For instance, you know, Equifax let over 300 security certificates expire and didn't update their software over 8,500 times when they were quote unquote hacked. You know, that should be criminal negligence and not just something that you pay a fine for. You know, there's now over 150 million Americans who will never have their social security number be private ever again, where every home that they've ever lived in and where their family lives and all their financial information is now just out available for free on the internet forever, right? And although some people can move homes, you can't change your social security number. So that's why we were successful in suing Equifax for property damage, because we were able to prove what that type of data being breached, what types of future harm could be incurred. Now, because we talked a bit about data ownership earlier, I wanted to draw your attention to the new data dividend law, which is something that has come in is being considered in California. California Governor Gavin Newsom, and that basically means that you would have the right to know, the right to not only know if your data is being monetized, but the right to a dividend of that. So that's incredibly exciting. I spend time advising different countries around the world on new data protection legislation, and data dividends and data ownership seem to be the most popular concept when I'm in a country that specifically deals with mass inequality. For instance, I was recently in India, and a lot of the legislators that are working on their first privacy laws there see data ownership and giving a dividend of data value back to the people that created the data as the easiest way to lift billions of people out of poverty, right? There are more people than most countries that I advise, and this is what they really see as a practical solution. So I'm very excited about what the future holds for this. So a little bit more about where I see all of this going. So in terms of how we fix this problem on a sustainable and long-term level, we really need to have digital literacy education. Most of us are not very data literate. We don't understand much about the data that we produce, or basic cybersecurity protocols, media literacy to spot fake news and disinformation. You know, we don't really have the tools to be always emotionally intelligent on social media and understand different types of cyber risks. So that started the last year. My nonprofit teaches kids how to protect themselves online. We concentrate on K through 12, and we do training of trainers. So I teach teachers and parents how to implement these programs at home. Now, besides having digital literacy, obviously, I'm a huge advocate for advancements in laws and regulation, while at the same time also wanting to support innovation in technology that allows for transparency, for opt-in, for data ownership and monetization. So I really see that that digital literacy education and awareness of these issues alongside new laws and regulations and ethical and humane technologies, that all three of those developing together will be that we're going to this on some level. So to talk a little bit more about what I mean by digital literacy, there's a new global standard in education called DQ, like IQ or EQ. It's a digital intelligence quotient, and that's a measured score on a gamified testing platform that was developed over the past decade, with indicator sets being contributed by a lot of the world's top universities, technology think tanks, big tech companies, ministries and departments of technology and innovation. And this is supported by the World Economic Forum, OECD, IEEE, and UNESCO. And so I'm a partner of this new global standard, teaching again kids, parents, now adults as well, in how to understand concepts of digital critical thinking and privacy management, screen time management, how to prevent cyberbullying, how to have digital empathy, how to control your digital footprint. These are all things that we weren't taught growing up in schools. We were just taught how to type on and use a computer, but no one ever told us that everything we were typing was going to be recorded and bought and sold and traded around the world to be used to, to target us in any way that they deem fit. So over the past few years, if you're really interested in kind of like digital asset legislation, in Wyoming, we've passed 18 new laws in the past 2.5 years. I've helped write and amend and lobby and pass most of those laws and spend a lot of time in Congress there. But we helped put together a framework that shows how you can comprehensively protect digital assets, so intangible assets that are, and how that would be managed, custodianship, how monetization would work, how you could have third parties dealing with digital assets, and what are the rules and regulations around that. So I'd really recommend, if you are interested in getting into the technicalities of digital asset law, to look at all of the newest legislation that's come out of Wyoming. And I can include that on follow-up materials that I send to Emma so that she can pass those along to everybody here. And so besides the work that I've been doing in Wyoming, some of the other interesting upcoming legislation is the New York Privacy Act. I've spent a lot of time with Senator Kevin Thomas, who's the main sponsor of the bill. And it's more comprehensive. The California Consumer Privacy Act talks more about data ownership and a lot more about the specifics of monetization and what those rights look like. The third iteration of that should be available publicly very soon. Actually, the last physical event I did before quarantine was a high-level roundtable in the New York State Senate to bring together a lot of thought leaders in technology and the privacy space for us to give final comments on that last draft. So I would love for you guys to check that out. It's a really well-written piece of legislation and could potentially end up being the biggest, I suppose, beacon for what the future of privacy law will look like around the world, because CCPA ensuring more rights than GDPR, and CCPA has, and the new New York Privacy Act has really gone to a next level. So I do suggest checking it out. So I still do a lot of this work in different places around the world, working on engagement and activism, both directly with legislators and with activists. I hosted my first virtual summit for the Own Your Data Foundation last Thursday, as I said, where we had experts around the world contributing, and I'm now creating a report that I'll start doing quarterly, that will be published and sent to not just educational institutions, but Congresses, parliaments around the world on the state of play in data protection and privacy. So very happy to pass along supplementary materials I did that I get to you guys, so you can look further into any of this. I know you guys concentrate on human rights law, and really a lot of the data rights frameworks around the world are based off of human rights law. And when you're talking about enforceability, it starts to go a little bit more into what property law looks like. But human rights law is still the basis of how most data rights activists talk about this legislation. And when we look at data rights in a human rights context, is really why and how you can see the strong need for enforceability. I know a lot of your questions are going to be more, we could get further into examples of why I feel that way, but I'd rather you guys guide the conversation from here forward so that we can get more into details on specific that you're interested in. Let me come back. Hey.
Thank you so much, Brittany.
Okay. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And honestly, I'm just really grateful that you've been able to make time for us, because I know how busy you are. I mean, actually, I'm overwhelmed how busy you are. It's insane.
trying to keep busy when the whole world has just become digital. And I was supposed to last month start teaching in person in schools, to do like parent-teacher conferences and school assemblies and working with the kids in workshops. And then all of a sudden, every child on the planet is learning online only.
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of, it was shocking that all of a sudden now, instead of convincing parents and students that that the most important issue, because it's always the most important issue to me, right? But now every parent and teacher is like, oh my God, all of the kids are just on a device all day long.
Yes.
Not protected, and they don't understand what that means, and they've never learned online before. And it makes everybody so much more vulnerable. So that's why, I'm very happy to make time for conversations like this, because I want everyone to really understand the intricacies of the issues, and especially, when you're discussing these issues in a human rights law context and framework, why we need to think about these issues every day and push to protect our rights. I mean, in 9/11, we all decided to give up a lot of our fundamental rights and freedoms and allow the passing of the Patriot Act, because we thought, okay, we'll give up we'll give up our privacy so that we can stop terrorism. And that's a good idea. Now we're okay with giving up all of our location data in the past and in the future because we think it's going to save human life. And therefore we're not thinking about how our data should be protected in these times of crisis.
Yes.
And how many fundamental rights and freedoms are so difficult to get back once you give them up.
Yeah, and actually one thing your book really makes clear as well is the extent to which fear was so easily manipulated and was seen as, you know, such a useful tool out of the Cambridge Analytica, for example. So this is something that we really need to, you know, bear in mind when we're thinking about how people's rights are taken away and how, you know, these kinds of encroachments on our rights are justified. It's very easy because we do need to, you know, it's vital we sort out this, you know, map and respond to the coronavirus, do, you know, contact tracing and so forth. But how we do this is going to be, you know, is something that we really need to do in a way that isn't fueled by panic. And, you know, yeah, totally limited. I'm going to open this up to the audience because we've spent loads of time chatting and I have more questions always for you, but everybody else I'm sure is at the edge of their seats wanting to ask questions.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to ask my students, first of all, if I might, because this is also their class. If any of them have any questions to start us off, please.
I have a question. I was wondering what what Own Your Data's stance is in terms of like movement, because like with the oil trade, it comes from the ground in a certain country and it's regulated, but people move around and people move states, people move countries, and there's refugee crises. How does that relate to what you do?
Right. So when you talk about data rights and movement of people, this is why it's so important for this to be a global conversation, because it's great and all having national legislation that's different in countries all over the place, but to have an international solution, because obviously the data trade flows across borders more easily than any other trade that exists. And so I've been working more with global organizations to think about what this actually looks like on enforceability. I just joined up with a group of data protection experts at Interpol and Europol that are specifically looking at how they police either cross-border data crimes or how they can actually look at data flows through countries to protect that from bad actors. It's kind of complex right now just because most countries do not even have privacy or data protection laws at all in the first place. And so the main conversations right now around this have just been between Europe and the United States, most essentially. So what are we thinking about cross-border data flows with different types of data? And I think one of the most interesting cases is shown in The Great Hack. It was Professor David Carroll who realized that in order to actually look into what data was held about him as a voter, he had to exercise his data rights in the United Kingdom, even though he was an American, because he didn't have any rights that he could exercise as an American man living in New York. But the United Kingdom already had laws that protected against his voter data being used by Cambridge Analytica. So I think that that just shows kind of how much we're in an infancy in this conversation right now. I mean, we shouldn't be. There's obviously people that have worked on data protection and privacy for the past couple decades, but it's only over the past few years that we've had enough momentum in the conversation where we're starting to think about what are the laws and regulations globally that could help manage and police cross-border data flows. As I said, Interpol and Europol are trying to figure that out. Many different United Nations organizations are putting out kind of ethical rules and standards that they believe that nation states should abide by. But in a lot of places, nothing has been passed yet, or the first new laws are being written now, or perhaps they have a data or privacy law from the 80s or 90s that has not been updated. A massive issue, and I would say right now the only near-term enforceability that I'm seeing is for individuals to actually have technology that helps them own their data and enforce their privacy. So it has to be the tools that you are using on a day-to-day basis that will protect what data you are sharing with whom and for what purposes. That's why I'm really into blockchain technology and distributed ledger and different kind of new forms of encryption and privacy by design apps like Signal, for instance, or Brave browser, DuckDuckGo that I use instead of Google Chrome. There are tools, especially when you're talking about the flow of people, because you mentioned migration. I have a lot of friends who have partnered with different organizations that with refugees, for instance, and so they are testing different platforms where you own your own digital identity. So if you didn't have, for instance, like a birth certificate or any documents or paperwork, you could be given a device where in an app you would provide enough information into that application that it would act as your digital ID card, and it couldn't be stolen from you because you would have enough biometrics or enough knowledge to confirm your identity through that application. And so digital identity apps, I think, are the most tangible way that most people are going to think about owning the most essential parts of their data, enough data that it confirms you are who you say you are and gives you access to government services, for instance, or healthcare, whatever it happens. While laws and regulations take their sweet time to be passed, I think it's really emerging technologies that are going to make that tangible for most people around the world.
Thank you.
Of course.
Any other questions from the students first?
I have a question.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for taking time out of your quarantine to come speak with us.
Absolutely.
So for Dr. Bryan's class, I'm writing about Brexit, and I know that you were involved in your work of the Leave campaign. So I was wondering what you found as being most effective as far as the themes used by either side of the campaigns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when I was involved with the Brexit campaign was in the very beginning, when Leave EU and Vote Leave were the two Leave campaigns. And I started doing some work for Leave EU in the very beginning while Chris White was working for Vote Leave. And both of us were doing, kind of the SCL playbook, so to say, which is to design their back-end data systems, what data they were going to collect, what types of surveys they were going to be doing, how they were going to be doing modeling and micro-targeting. And the first bit of work that Cambridge Analytica did for the Leave EU side was to do a survey of voters about why people would or would not be persuaded to want to leave the EU. And there were four different, maybe there were five. Now I think there were four main categories of people within the UK electorate that were deemed to be the types of individuals that could easily be persuaded to want to leave. And some of it was a little bit typical political motivations, but when they zoomed in on certain individuals and why they wanted to leave, you could find, for instance, there was an entire category of millions of people that could only be persuaded to have this conversation if you only talked about immigration, for instance. And those are the types of people that either they might not have gotten a job out of college, or maybe they didn't even go to university, and they're in a vulnerable population in terms of their employment. And those were the types of people that got targeted with a lot of the campaigns that you saw coming out later, which were all fake news and disinformation about what immigration in the UK was causing. And I think that's that in the same way as the way people were targeted in the United States by the Trump campaign using kind of people who were not American. It was nearly the same type of strategy, which is to find people that are neurotic and persuaded by their fears and insecurities, to find people who are easily incited. So the more neurotic you are, the more you make snap decisions, and therefore you would perhaps share something without reading it. You would become angry and comment on something before you even engage with the concept. And those strategies were used in Brexit on certain groups of people incredibly successfully by the Leave campaigns, and same with the Trump campaign. It's one of the main reasons and the main examples that I give when I explain to legislators why data rights and violation of data rights actually needs to be a criminal liability. Because when you have enough intimate data about individuals, enough to be able to tell their levels of neuroticism and what will make them act out of fear, what will incite violence out of them, that's where you really realize that it's not just a conversation of, you know, oh, can I keep my data private? I don't want to share it with Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. Like, no, we have laws and regulations against, you know, incitement of violence. We have laws against slander and libel. We have laws against voter suppression. We're just not able to enforce them on digital platforms if we don't have any rights to our data. So those are laws with criminal liability that we are not able to protect from being broken on platforms like Facebook, because we can't say, okay, I own this data and you cannot use this data for political purposes. But if we're able to pass a lot of these new laws and regulations, and we're able to get platforms like Facebook regulated, where they're not able to target us based off of certain data points, then we'll be a lot more successful in stopping the type of you know, negative propaganda, negative campaigning, and micro-targeting that were so prolific in 2016.
Can I add on to that thought process? To just ask you what kinds of data we should be most worried about in relation to displaying whether we're neurotic and how we can be manipulated with fear. Whether it's something particular of now as well that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now, because we don't have much control over what data is being collected about us, there are to take control of that by using privacy-centric platforms. You know, again, I would say if you are using Google Chrome, if you are using WhatsApp all the time, if you are on loads of Apple devices, trust me, your data is being bought and sold and traded and shared around the world with sometimes thousands of companies a minute. And so most of the tools that you're using in your daily life mean it's very easy to tell if you're neurotic. It's very easy to tell once you read something and it immediately kind of incites you. It's easy to see what makes you quickly click on something or share something. And the more data you're producing, the easier it is for data scientists and even just artificial intelligence itself to be able to figure out what they need to push to you, when, in what way, to get you angry about something, to get you to take action on something. And that's why I really have been concentrating on digital literacy education, because I think if you understand how to use privacy-centric platforms, if you understand how to manage your screen time, if you understand media literacy and how to be able to understand if something has or has not been fact-checked, or what is a real news organization and what you should share and what you shouldn't share, and how to report negative content. All of these are skills that will help in the end, help us protect ourselves. Because I really do believe over the next few years, we will see a lot of advancements in privacy legislation. We'll see a lot of new privacy-centric tools that come out. But right now, most people spend all day on devices that are collecting data about every single thing that you're doing, even if you think you're not at managing your privacy, you still are probably giving away, you know, thousands of data points about yourself, you know, every moment. And I think it's important to realize that and to take responsibility for our own data protection and privacy. I wish it didn't have to fall to us and we didn't have to force big tech companies to be moral and ethical, but I really think self-empowerment is going to be the fastest short-term solution.
Not a complete solution, but you know, a necessary part of it.
Absolutely.
Okay, any more questions?
I have a question.
Oh, yes. Hi.
Hi, my name is Jordan. I'm in Greg's class. I have a lot of questions. If I'm able to ask two, I would really appreciate it because they're sort of interrelated.
Sure.
The first is about what you mentioned about making dividends. So people being able to make a percentage of money back on the data that the companies sell. But it makes me wonder then, what happens then if that creates like a classist, even further classist systemic oppression, control, and surveillance of the lower classes. And then in a lot of cases, nation states governments are the actors of huge human rights violations. So if we're leaving it upon the government to kind of decide, approve these legislations that can help people or keep things private, but then it makes this incentive that people can sell their data to kind of balance out this inequality. What's how can we prevent a kind of like total government control to such a high degree? So that's the first part of the question. And the second part is, well, I'll let you answer that part first.
Yeah, of course. So this is a question I get asked a lot, and I really think that it's important that as we are building tools that we believe are going to be good for empowerment, that again, we're protecting people from abuse. So a lot of the companies that I've seen right now that are building solutions for you to monetize your own data have done some thinking into that, and it's going to be really difficult until these tools start to be used on a mass scale to actually see what are the biggest problems. For me, I would say, I think we're going to solve more problems than we create by allowing billions of people around the world that exist on less than $2 a day to make more than $2 a day just off of their data. I think that definitely solves a lot of things, but again, if people can choose their privacy because they don't need the money, and then only people who do need the money are the ones who are sharing it, yes, it has a possibility to actually make those individuals more vulnerable. And I have to admit that that's one of the biggest problems in this conversation, because when you're designing something to have a positive impact, you need to think of all of the potential negative impacts. And that definitely is one of them. And so it's going to be a lot of trial and error. It's going to be a lot of, back-end design in the algorithms to think about how we can incentivize people to share data in a responsible way. How are we building platforms that still allow data to be shared anonymously or pseudonymously, and therefore safely? And in these platforms that are collecting data, what does the government or do they not? And that really, again, gets down onto more of a technical level. How are we protecting our digital identity? Is it possible for certain data points to never actually be shared? can we hide our personally identifiable information when we're sharing the rest of the data about ourselves? And that's why I think the conversation has turned to privacy by design. How can we make sure that essential, important data points that would leave people vulnerable are never shared and are always encrypted, so that a lot of the most frightening or negative use cases of micro-targeting actually wouldn't work. And again, we're in the infancy of this, but I think that's going to be one of the most difficult conversations. I was surprised actually when I worked in Mexico for most of 2017, doing again data projects, and one of the things that I discovered was that most big companies in Mexico, they didn't have much data about people that had lower purchasing power. So the less money you had, the less data they had about those people, and therefore that data was worth more than people that had tons of devices and were creating data all of the time. So the data of wealthy people was so easy to get that it just wasn't worth as much money. So in a very interesting way, the data programs that we designed were actually able to give more money to people that didn't have much money in the system designs. And that's a really, I would have never known that if I didn't actually go and experiment and try it. So the ability to give millions of people an income that they wouldn't have already had, it was incredible to see. Like millions of people in Mexico and Colombia use one of my apps that again pays you for your data. And it was the first time that most of those people had ever been able to, have internet connectivity on their phones, for instance. And it was, again, interesting to see, but, it's a conversation with, would those people have wanted to share that data otherwise if they didn't want their phone bill to be paid by this app? I don't know exactly how we're going to solve that besides to try to solve problems, and when new ones come up, work on it as they come. But I thank you for bringing that up, because it is the moral and ethical question on data ownership. We don't want to create more inequality while we're trying to solve that in the first place. So yeah, thanks for bringing it up.
Could I ask the second question?
Mm-hmm.
Please do.
This is more about like previous data collection, and in terms of like from my personal experience, I made a Facebook when I was like 14, and so I'm thinking about where the laws are at in terms of consent of data mining for people who are not legally of the age to consent. And so that's one part of it. And then the other part is what can we do, and is there anything we can do about the data that has been mined about us before this point? Like if we weren't so aware, and especially things that were mined about us before we were of the legal age of consent.
Right. Yeah, I also joined Facebook when I was 17 and first got my college email address. You had to have a college email address to sign up for Facebook at the time. It was the first thing I did when I got my college email address. In fact, I was waiting for it just so I could open a Facebook page. So I've been on Facebook for very many years, and definitely since I was a minor. And as part of making the great hack, we spent one entire day projecting my Facebook page on a wall in front of the entire film crew and most of my producers and directors. And we started from day one and went all the way up my wall from 2005 until last year. And it was one of the most terrifying things I had ever done, because I couldn't believe, like in the beginning of Facebook, there was no personal messaging, so you just wrote on each other's walls. So everything you said was totally public. And in front of just, a room of maybe 10 people, I'm showing them my entire personal life from 17 until private messaging came in, right? And it really made me think, oh my God, I had no idea what I was sharing. I had no idea that this data would be so openly available, how much intimate information I was sharing at that time. Now, the good thing is that in most countries, there are very specific regulations about how you deal with the data of children, of minors. If you want to look more specifically on the US, you should check out Common Sense Media, headed by Jim Steyer. And they are the most prolific organization on protecting children online. He played a big role in the California Consumer Privacy Act, and Common Sense does a lot of specific advocacy work on putting out legislation that further protects kids online. Obviously, Facebook and Google have been found to have had multiple violations in the ways that children are able to be targeted on their platform. Technically, there's a lot of advertising, communications, paid ads that should, I wish that I didn't have to see them, but are not technically allowed to be served to children. And not all platforms have been able to fully comply with that. So that's still like quite a big problem. The enforceability of laws. How do we actually make sure that on the back end that Facebook has made sure that adult advertisements don't get shown to children? It's a technical solution because a lot of the legislation is already there. And so that's really enforceability and compliance. Since GDPR went into enactment, most of the information commissioner's offices in every European country have been completely overwhelmed with subject access requests. Again, since you asked about getting data back that you've already produced, California, you're allowed to do that throughout all of Europe. You can file a subject access request that will show you all of the data that's being held on you, and you can revoke the rights of that organization to continue to use that data. You can request the right to delete, and that is not that easy, because if a company or a government decides to not answer your subject access request within the 30 or 45 days, it's different for GDPR and CCPA by 15 days. If they don't respond in that period of time, then it gets kicked to the information commissioner as an unfulfilled request. And the ICOs are literally drowning in these because companies are not able to figure out quickly enough what data is being held and actually get it to someone. And then the ICO just drowns in subject access requests that haven't been answered. Enforceability and compliance is really the most difficult part of all of this. In countries where we have seen successful legislation and regulation get passed, how do we actually make sure that we are able to enforce our data rights? It's difficult. I think in the end, this is going to be again, a tech solution conversation. You should check out an app called Revoke that I'm advising right now. It's an app where you log in, you verify your identity, and then it shows you every single data breach that your data has been in. And it shows you all of the thousands or tens of thousands of companies that are holding your data for marketing purposes. And you can tick all of the boxes and file subject access requests for every single company in there. And you can file for not just the right to see all of your data. You should see it first, take the next step, but then you can request the right to delete and to revoke consent to be marketed to from all of those companies. Now, as solutions like that become more integrated into a backend where a company can just say, okay, I've received a subject access request, you automatically get sent the data that we hold on you, and then you can decide whether you want them to delete it or continue to use it. So I really see the future of, you get an offer, okay, if you want us to continue to be able to use it, you're going to earn 50 cents a day or whatever it happens to be. And if you don't want to, then you can choose to delete it or just, to revoke the marketing consent. It's going to be tech solutions that will really put that power in our hands. I think right now the burden heavy the heavy burden of the way that the legislation is organized is too much paperwork, too much manual labor for people. Companies are starting to realize that they don't actually know all of the data that they've been collecting and where it is and how to match it up and how to actually figure out what they hold on you or not. It's been kind of funny actually to see some companies that have discovered that they didn't even realize that they were collecting certain data sets about their consumers, or they didn't have the ability to match the data that they've collected about me from one source to another and provide it to me in an understandable format. So forcing people to go through that is very good. Forcing corporations to clean up their back end and, you know, be more technically compliant is very important. And we're getting there little by little, but I still think we have, you know, 3 to 5 more years before enforcing our data rights becomes as easy as it is to enforce other rights.
I have a question. My name is Alejandra, and I'm in Greg's class. You just mentioned this Revoke app and how you can manage all your data that has been monetized around like probably the world. And what would you tell to college students that are exposed to all this information and like that can be used against us, which is terrifying because we're collecting, we're making and creating data every day by like through our college work and through our own research of this information that you're sharing with us about data rights and data policies. And what would you tell to like college students that are exposed to this type of issues, and what would you tell to them for like what is the future for people that already know what is going on, and yeah, and how can we educate our family and like the people that already has been victimized and that will be victimized, including us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think, again, it starts with awareness and education of actually, you know, what is the gravity of the problem? And to land the plane on what I mean by that, think about how many apps you have on your phone right now. Have you read the terms and conditions of any of those apps?
Probably not.
Yeah, most people never have. But if you think about it, each app is a form of spyware that you have installed on your device, and you don't know who the developers are on the back end of that application. You don't know what company owns that application. And so you're given random people and companies all around the world direct access to all of your contacts, all of your photos and videos, your live location, everything that you're reading, everyone that you're talking to, the data that you're producing in other apps. And realizing that and taking accountability for that is very important. Are you happy to sell your privacy for convenience? Do you need all of those apps? Are you comfortable with the fact that the people who built them might have access to your entire life at all times? If you're not comfortable with that, you should really think about deleting the application, number one. You know, there's a lot of convenience apps that you might use on your phone that you could probably just log into the website on your computer, and then that company doesn't have direct access to everything that goes on in here. Starting to think about using privacy by design platforms, you know, for anything important that I'm doing. I talk to people on Signal, not on WhatsApp. I really think that unless you're trying to run like some sort of streaming application where you need Google Chrome for something, I would really suggest using Brave browser or DuckDuckGo, so that all of the data that you're producing in your search, especially for your research, is not getting sold and traded around the world without your consent. I would really suggest that you guys look into DQ. I mean, I'm starting to do virtual digital intelligence lectures that help more with, I mean, I feel like especially for people that are in college, like the media literacy part is very important to understand what is fake news and disinformation. What does it look like? How can you spot fake or dishonest content? How can you spot when something is being shown to you to manipulate you? How can you tell the difference between a real media organization that does fact checking and has corroborated sources as opposed to just something that is either an opinion piece or a targeted piece that is made to influence you, but it's not actually based off of fact. It's not from a reliable source. I think those skills are really important, and I'll give Emma the link to the upcoming online lectures that I'm going to be giving about that stuff. But check out my website, ownyourdata.foundation. We've got a lot of resources about data rights, about how to protect your privacy. I mean, I'd suggest checking out the Electronic Frontier Foundation's website, the Center for Humane Technology. They have a whole how-to section that teaches you how to be less addicted to your devices, like turning off your notifications that notify you of something that is not a message from a human being. If you don't realize it, you probably get hundreds of notifications a day that are not about someone texting you or calling you. It's just notifying you that something else happened. You should try to turn all of those off. It's a nice experiment to put your phone on black and white instead of on color. You pick it up a lot less because you're not addicted to it. There's a lot of things like that it never occurs to you on a daily basis, but there is a way for you to. There are many ways for you to protect yourself. It's not as easy as it should be, but the more of these skills and understanding and awareness you have, then the more tools you have to be your own privacy advocate while we work on reforming the companies and legislators.
That's really great advice. And I'm going to say to all of my students who are still in the room, please, after this talk, if you can go and do that, that will be part of your class too today. Thank you.
I didn't quite get that.
Oh, I was just saying to all of my students that after this talk, if they should go and do all of these things themselves, because I think that's an important part of, trying these things out as a part of the learning experience for today. Okay, any more questions?
Yes, is there time for one more?
Oh, yeah.
Hi, my name is Jim. I actually, I work at the college. I work in the development office where I take care of data and do analytics for the fundraising people. And I guess I have two questions that are not terribly related. The first is, and thank you. I enjoyed the film and I enjoy your work. And thank you for opening this class up to Professor. How is your foundation being funded primarily? Where are you finding support for the foundation's work is one question. And then the other is a little more, goes to the core of what Cambridge Analytica does. You talk about media literacy and how key it is. Do you think it's possible for someone to be perfectly media literate? I think I'm pretty clever. I think I know the difference between crap news and real news. And I think that insulates me terrifically from the ability to be manipulated by the likes of Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah.
Is that hubris, or do you think you could still get to me?
Right, so I'll address your last question first, which is that I find it so important for people to understand and be aware of what targeting is, what propaganda looks like, how to understand how your data is used, and how people can so easily abuse that with fake news and disinformation campaigns. And the more you are informed, the more insulated you are from being affected by that. And that's really the point. Once you really understand all of those concepts, and what it looks like, then you can protect yourself from it. And I really do believe that we can empower ourselves to be more media literate, to lead a more successful digital life, to not accidentally share things that are not real, and help contain the problem kind of one by one, because it's a lot more difficult for us to stop the propaganda from being made in the first place. Obviously Emma is an expert in what the influence industry looks like and how money moves through that industry. And stopping that industry is going to be difficult. Regulating it has been difficult, but we're getting there. But really what is going to disempower the bad actors in that industry is for us all to be empowered to not be affected by the money that they try to spend to change our minds and opinions. So I think I really do think that digital literacy is where I'm going to be spending most of my time for the next few years. It's really something that I think will be able to change how vulnerable a lot of us are today, and change how vulnerable we have been. We do have a positive road out of this. I mean, I am an eternal optimist, but I really do think that that we're getting there. So you're right. If you feel that is because you are, and you've made yourself aware, and you're a very technical person, so that's helpful as well. Most people don't understand the back-end systems and how this stuff works, and therefore breaking down something that is so intangible like data to people that don't deal with data and don't know what data looks like or how it can be used is much more difficult. So you're always going to be more protected usually than the person next to you. But I think more people will also be more technically literate in the future as well, besides just media literacy.
But even you who are who think about nothing about this, well, I'm sure you think about other things, but you concentrate on this work with all of your energy and a lot of focus, but you feel the need to not use Chrome, for example. I mean, I use Chrome all the time. I think I know how to avoid being manipulated by the stories that come my way. And I don't really care if some advertiser knows how much time I spent reading about guitar strings yesterday, or something. I'd like to get the money back for it, but I don't know. Why would someone as literate as you about these issues have to care whether someone knows what your clickstream is doing?
Well, I would really say that I like to know what data is being collected about me and who it's being used by. And so,
sure.
For instance, I don't use Brave browser just for my privacy. I use Brave browser because it actually pays me for the data that I create in tokens. So I just like to have a little bit more of a handle on it, to have control over what I'm sharing and what I'm not. And I really do think that over the next couple of years, understand the data that we're producing. If we want to understand who that's going to be shared with, and be able to toggle that on and off, but still use the platform if we say no to sharing any of our data, that we're going to have the ability to do that. We don't yet, so I still choose privacy enabled platforms if I have the ability to. Obviously, we're on Zoom right now. Yes, I still use WhatsApp. I still have a Facebook page. I just don't have Facebook installed on my phone. I log into it on my laptop. But these little things mean that there is less data about my daily activities that is out there. It's not that I'm afraid of being micro-targeted, but every time I do see a piece of fake news that shows up in my news feed, I start to think about what data did I produce in order for that to be targeted at me? Because there's something that they know about me where would think that this would make me angry, this would rile me up. And so I just try to engage with it as critically as possible. It's not really to prevent being micro-targeted, but to have slightly more control over the situation than I would have otherwise.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
If I may say, I think for me, this is also a question about the type of debate we're having in America versus ways that you might see it if you're from a different cultural context.
Right.
For me, as a British person, I don't see it in terms of data property rights. Mm-hmm. Property rights are something that is such a, it seems such an American way of framing the problem to me, or the solution. And that's not necessarily wrong, but it's just a different way of looking at it. And for me, this isn't a problem about individuals, and that should be seen as like what I, care about with my data and my consent over my property. I feel like we have a responsibility to everyone, and that data is powerful in the aggregate. And my data, I might not be the one who votes for Donald Trump or Brexit or whatever it might be, but my data might then be useful in the aggregate with everyone else's data for other people to be targeted. Mm-hmm. And I have a responsibility to think about the algorithms that are targeting other people too, and how my data contributes to that wider problem. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't think that necessarily consent is enough for tackling this issue. And I'm wondering, how we get beyond this issue of it just being about consent over my control over my data, because actually I might not care about those other people. I might just be seeing it in terms of, well, is it harming me? If it's not harming me, am I going to have the sense of responsibility for other people being harmed by, the aggregate use of my data in a society? Can you respond to what you would suggest as the solution to this problem?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really think that this is something that a lot of technologists that are building kind of data protection and digital identity tools have been thinking about. Like, how do you empower people to understand what they should or should not be comfortable with sharing, and how that data is going to be used? I have a few friends who have developed platforms, for instance, where you can understand how you can share your aggregated medical data with healthcare researchers, so that you could, help cancer and diabetes. How can you donate your data to certain good causes that are, not just research-based, but that could be used by either different government departments or NGOs and advocacy organizations for solving certain problems. I've seen a lot of climate change solutions that have to do with data sharing. How can you decide whether or not you want to share your data for political purposes? Do you not want to be targeted with any political ads whatsoever? I mean, Facebook actually just implemented this last year, where you can turn off political advertising, which is quite cool. I didn't expect to see that from them, but I was glad to see it. So I really think that we're at this kind of like crux of where people are starting to understand what these issues mean, and therefore could make more informed decisions in the future about what you would want to share and what you wouldn't. I mean, obviously we can't expect that everybody is going to understand that, or that's going to be tangible for too many people right now. But that's because most of us never learned about any of this growing up. I mean, the kids that I'm teaching right now, I'm teaching them digital literacy before they have their own device. I'm teaching before they've ever had a social media account or their own smartphone or been allowed alone to be on their parents' computer. And so when you teach a kid that the way that you work a phone is, if you want to use an application, you read the terms and conditions. And if you're not comfortable with what they ask from you, then you don't install the application. And that's how you use a phone, right? That's not what we were taught. So therefore we're almost never going to think that way. It's really hard to break people of lifelong bad habits because none of us were digitally educated. And sad to say that, but you know, I'm a massive transparency and data rights consent advocate, and I spent 10 years in law school, and I don't read the legal agreements that I sign sometimes hundreds of times a day, because you're signing a legal agreement in terms and conditions. You're signing a legal agreement every time you accept cookies onto your computer from websites. You're installing spyware every single day, and you're consenting to give away your rights to people that you don't even know who they are, what country their company's based in, who they're going to sell or share the data with. I mean, it's a much bigger problem than a lot of people are willing to admit. But once we're able to educate people on what they should and shouldn't be sharing and give them the tools to protect what they want to protect, we're going to be in a much better place than we are right now.
Yeah, I still think that it's going to be very difficult to get people to care about other people. I think it's easier to get people to care about their data than it is to care about what their data might do to others, unfortunately. But it might be that that's a hard problem to solve.
Yeah.
Any more questions from other people? Have you got a little more time? Are we okay at the moment?
I've got another call, and yeah, I've got a little bit more time.
Okay, great, thank you. Any more questions, guys?
I have one. It's not so much about data, it's actually a bit more about like your own story with Cambridge Analytica, if that's okay. When you first started your talk, you were saying how it was really like when the story leaked about Facebook that you decided to like take the step to become a whistleblower. I guess I was curious if like that story hadn't leaked at that time, or if it hadn't leaked at all, do you think you would have said something after leaving Cambridge Analytica for like the next step that you took? Or do you think it was really the conversation being public that like gave you the courage to do it?
Yeah, I think, so I had left Cambridge January 2018, and after I left, there were a couple months where, again, I was spending time mostly working on legislation and regulation, and I was trying to deal in a legislative lobbying way with some of these issues already. And then when this story hits the papers, where Chris Wiley said, I collected this Facebook data set and the company never deleted it, I was like, well, if they were willing to lie about that, they may have lied about many other things. And I had so many red flags raised while I was working with that company where they wouldn't give, called our lawyers because they said I was creating too many invoices when all I wanted was legal advice about whether I could or couldn't do a certain data project. When that story hit the papers, I thought, okay, well, if they deleted that data set, then there's probably a lot of other things that the world needs to know. One, this problem is so much bigger than just a Facebook data set. We need to be having a conversation about what that Facebook data set was used for and what all of the rest of the data that companies like Cambridge Analytica have, what that actually means, and how you can be targeted. We need to talk about voter suppression. We need to talk about slander, libel, fake news, and disinformation. We need to talk about incitement of violence by foreign actors that have direct access to us with our devices. These are the conversations that we need to be having, not the Facebook data set. This problem is so much bigger, and I know for sure I have the email where my chief data officer told Facebook that he had deleted the data. So if I've got that, there's probably some other stuff that I should look through in my inbox and figure out how to show it to the world, really. And that was, I mean, it was a scary process, but when I started looking back in my inbox, I realized, yeah, the gravity of the problem is big enough that I am willing to put everything on the line to start discussing this publicly. Because if I stay quiet about this, now there's, you know, we would miss the opportunity for the momentum that the privacy industry, that the technology industry really needed. We needed this kind of, you know, ethical and moral awakening that's really just going in the wrong direction. So I think that, you know, I was lucky and honored to be able to come out with evidence about these issues at a time where people were listening. And, you know, honored to get to publish my book Targeted with HarperCollins and work with an incredible film team and advisors. You know, Emma helped us loads on The Great Hack. And for us to be able to put that out there and have, you know, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people around the world see that and start to understand and comprehend these issues. I mean, that was, you know, hard work and a bit of luck and whatever went on. But, you know, I couldn't be more happy that I did what I did and that people are still listening and that people want to be involved and that there's now a global movement to address these issues because God knows we needed it.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. This is like a hyper specific question. Like you were talking about all those like browsers we can use and like steps we can take, but like Instagram, for instance, is owned by Facebook and like you can't really recreate the Instagram experience on the desktop so much. And I just feel like it would be really hard to convince people 25 and under to just give up Instagram. So I was curious, like, and like I know like you have an account that you use primarily for the own your data stuff, but like still like how, I don't know, that's just like the biggest example that came to mind for me.
Totally. And so I didn't delete any of my social media, although I stopped using most social media when I started working at Cambridge. Because it started to creep me out, all of the things that it was used for. So from 2014 until I became a whistleblower, I didn't really put much of anything out on social media at all. Actually, my Instagram account, I restarted a couple of weeks ago because someone wanted to view me on it, but I hadn't used it since 2012. So it's a balance, really. Like I like to say, I'm not trying to destroy Facebook or get everyone to delete their Facebook account. I just want you to realize the risk that you're taking when you use it and how you use it. I don't have the Facebook app installed on my phone. I log in online. Instagram, you can't really use the desktop. You can't do an Instagram live interview on desktop. I tried. So that's obviously specifically so that the app can get as much data from you as possible. They would enable all of the features on the desktop version if they could get as much of your data off your laptop as they can off your phone. Trust me. So it's being aware of that. And what are you willing to give away? If I'm talking about my banking information or I'm talking with my lawyers, I do that on privacy-enabled platforms. I do not own platforms to talk about anything that is serious or private, where if the data was going to be breached, that it would cause me, you know, any heartache, right? So it's more to be aware of what data you're producing and how you're consuming digital content and doing that in a more responsible and ethical way. I really would love for you to check out the Center for Humane Technology's website. If you go on the what to do sections and how to unaddict yourself from your devices, there's a lot of really cool things that you should experiment with. Until I read that, I didn't even know that I could make my phone black and white. But you stop picking up your phone when your mind is no longer addicted to the bright colors. It's very cool, but there's a lot of things like that that you don't think about that allow you to disengage from it a bit more. You know, I'm not telling people to stop using social media. Just recognize when you use it and manage what you're happy to give away.
Absolutely, absolutely. Center for Humane Technology is excellent as well. Totally with you there. I just wanted to say there was a great part in your book, which I have right here, at the end where you're giving all these like this discussion about what to do and so on. And you talk a little bit about new threats and new challenges. And one of the things you mentioned was Libra, which you were quite critical of. And I wondered if you could talk a little, since you're such a, like an expert in the area of, you know, blockchain and crypto and so on. And this is stuff that a lot of people still are not very clued into. If you could talk a little bit about the threats and what things people should be worrying about in that area. And perhaps what would be an more ethical system in that in these kinds of technologies?
Yeah, what's really important for people to understand, you know, what I mentioned quite a few times in my lecture, I think, is that every day we are producing exponentially more data. So when companies like Facebook decide to buy WhatsApp and Instagram and integrate that with their own data sets and make all of that data flow together, you need to remember what Alexander Nick said, which is that this is an arms race, and the more data that each of these companies have on us, the more powerful they become and the easier we are to manipulate and take advantage of. So with the development of the Libra platform, which is Facebook's new cryptocurrency that they're coming out with, which I originally hoped would be used to pay people for some sort of Facebook tokens. You get a value for the data that they're using, then maybe you could use that for your own Facebook ads or whatever value you normally exchange within Facebook. Even if you don't, the potential to take your Facebook tokens and turn that into dollars, you know, is a conversation that was being had at the time. Now it turns out that Libra is actually a partnership with tons of different big companies around the world that have intimate access to our financial information. You know, for instance, you know, big banks, and MasterCard was originally a part of it. For those data sets to be synced up with all of the data that Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram have about us, and then all of a sudden they have access to all of our purchasing history and all of our financial data intimately amongst the groups of people that we're joining. It really can be, because you could start to see a future where if a handful of companies had absolutely all of the data about you, they would, for instance, be able to charge you and I different prices because they would know how much money was in our bank accounts, for instance. There's still a little bit of that, like price fluctuations depending on how much the advertiser knows about you. But if they really had all of the information about you, it'd be a lot easier to manipulate you in ways that we haven't even imagined yet. Just like the price difference thing is just something that is like surface level tangible, and it's pretty scary. So to think about all of those companies combining their data sets is something that probably shouldn't be allowed, or should at least be very, very tightly regulated. So the ways that that solve some of these problems, the idea is that every time that data is being transacted on one of these platforms, you would be able to have a self-executing what's called smart contract, where I would be able to say, I am comfortable with sharing these types of data with these people for these purposes, and therefore every time there's a request or an attempt to advertise to me or use my data for some sort of purpose, I would automatically get a value exchange. So I would either get, you know, a Facebook token or a digital dollar or whatever it happened to be every time someone's accessing my data for the purposes that I consented for it to be used for. And all of that would be automatic. It would be self-executing. I wouldn't have to go to court to enforce a contract. It's a digital contract that automatically happens on the back end. And so that's where I think the future of data ownership is very exciting, because you can have an app on your phone, and hundreds of them already exist, where you are directly seeing the value that you are producing as a human being every day. And you're automatically getting that, and it means your data is being governed by rules that you have set. and your data could not be shared with organizations for political advertising if you said you didn't want it, or you're never going to get communications from these types of companies. For you to be able to set your own rules and have the digital literacy in order to understand what rules you should be setting, that's really where this is going. And when I'm going to give you links to share with everybody, Emma, but I'll give you examples of what some of those projects look like, so you can see a little bit more about what that is.
I've also already had a request for your slides from somebody who was in the audience who was a cryptocurrencies and human rights specialist, Leanne Usher, a friend of mine. So if you wouldn't mind sharing the slides, it would also be really amazing.
Yeah, absolutely, of course.
Thank you. Okay, that's great. I know we've been talking for quite a while and you have another call, so I think we should probably wrap it up there, but I just want to say how grateful I am for your time today. And I think on behalf of the entire world, how grateful we are that you came forward and have, exposed Cambridge Analytica's wrongdoing and made us more aware of our data rights and all of the challenges that are faced in our digital age. Thank you very much for joining us today, Brittany, Kaiser, and thank you and bye.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. Great to see all of you. If you have any more questions, just pass them to Emma. She can get in touch with me anytime, and I'll send some interesting kind of documents and any of this.
Wonderful. And I'll send you a copy of the recording as well that we're putting out on the website.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Absolutely. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.